let's do a quick round of introductions. I can start. I'm Joaquin Dominguez. I'm the head of marketing for dissect.
My name's Tom Gatton, and I'm the CEO of Unpack.
Hi everyone, I'm Tim Bond, founder of techpros.io. We are a community and a platform of enterprise thought leaders covering a range of industries, and we produce content which hopefully enlightens the readers and helps them with their career development.
Hello, I'm Romy Badaloo. I'm a marketing and communications consultant. And I've most recently worked with EY and Kingfisher.
I'm Tamsin. I'm content marketing and communications lead for R3, which is an enterprise blockchain distributed ledger technology services firm. So work a lot within the financial services world as well.
Hi guys, I'm Alvin. I'm the social media lead for a company called Thread. We are a fintech who specialize in the payments space.
Thank you, Alvin. Emily.
Hi guys, I am a social media manager and trainer at RSK Group, which is essentially a company that works globally in sustainable solutions.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming today. We will start now our podcast. Very welcome to our influencer marketing in B2B podcast. Today we are focusing on those who sway opinions and trends, influencers. They are not just celebrities, they are experts, they are content creators and more. So why they matter? Because they are trusted voices in their fields. So whether it's for entertainment, solving problems, or sharing expertise. We will discuss also what makes them stand out. So probably their unique tone of voice, individuality, credibility, and how this builds trust, and also how this forms a connection with their audience. So influencers are everywhere. Apparently, they are really effective. So in B2C marketing, we can see them on social media, from social media platforms to television, from micro-influencers to brand ambassadors like Roger Federer or George Clooney. But today's focus is on B2B influencers. And for our conversation, the definition that we are using is basically everyone that influences an audience. Okay, we are not limiting ourselves to event speakers. We are delving into people that work for our company, customers, prospects, and many others. So we will discuss different uses, like lead generation, for example, how to create content with influencers, how to approach them, and finally, we will discuss how to measure success. So, Tamsin, maybe I would like to start with you, because you described, and I would like to start with B2B marketing. So you describe B2B marketing as a psychological game. In this game, I assume you rely on emotions, and engaging with businesses probably is more complex than consumers. So could you talk a little bit about what we discussed about this psychological game?
Yeah, I think it was sort of more psychological and complex in the sense that when you think of B2C, you're kind of you've got the product, you hand it over to them. Whereas when you're working with B2B, you always need to think of the end game and what the business you're selling to, what their customers are needing. So it's about understanding the overall strategy and the mission of the businesses you are trying to sell to. And then through that, you've got to then switch your own marketing tactics to help that strategy that's both your strategy, the other business's strategy, and then the end customer. So there's just a lot of moving parts that I think a lot of people don't actually think about when it comes to B2B marketing. When people think of marketing, they just think of B2C, someone sees something on, a screen, or they read something, they're going to buy something, but it's just a lot more complex. You've just got to think about how the customers are going to react at the end after you've spoken to a plethora of other businesses.
Yeah, I agree. At the end, you are making an impact on someone else's professional career, right?
Yeah.
You take a decision, could be really good, but also could be really, really good, but also really bad. Emily, you have expertise training senior leadership teams on the use of professional profiles. So your experience also is really, really useful to this part of the conversation. So do they use their professional profiles to share information? Is this because they need to rely on emotions, again, as I asked before?
So do you mean sharing information with their personal profiles?
Exactly.
Yeah, so we tend to, if we can obtain a bit of buy-in from a senior lead team, because it tends to be the demographic that usually sit in those roles tend to be people who are a little bit more reluctant to put themselves out there on social media, so to speak. But yeah, so we kind of tend to focus more on those people who are higher up in terms of providing that training and upskilling them to represent the business in terms of that respect. So we focus a lot on really utilizing them to be more of a reach for our message at RSK. So we do a lot of work around actually giving them information around our initiatives and what we're doing and what our goals are and our strategic goals are as well, so they can kind of move those forward on our behalf, especially because a lot of these will sit in industries that we're working in. So for example, we have a really prominent influencer, it's a bit of a micro influencer, has around 18k followers on LinkedIn, and he sits in the construction industry, and he does really well for himself within that industry. So he obviously talks about things.
He's an employee of RSK.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
he is. Yeah, so he actually originally came to me for support with their the actual business page, but then he moved into actually becoming more of the influencer side of it. So he was able to talk about his own insight and then also plug RSK as well. So we kind of provide that training and support on what information they should be putting out, so ensuring they're aligning with our tone of voice and our messaging. So that's kind of how we lead that out. So it's like they're an extension of our brand, and because they work for us, they're so invested in the brand, and that comes from our company culture in-house as well, which helps drive that.
And that's the tone of voice talent is even more challenging for you, because under RSK you have, I don't remember, like 200 companies under the umbrella of the company.
So we encourage a lot. We do encourage a lot of authenticity. We do encourage them to kind of be themselves, because that's what people buy into. So as long, and we do kind of keep an eye on what the content is they're putting out there, and we will realign them if we feel it's going off the mark. But a lot of the place where we tend to focus is on LinkedIn. So people tend to just have that little bit of extra filter anyway, because they know it's a professional platform. So we do actually encourage more of that. You know, if people are buying into your authenticity, then we want you to do that. We just want to make sure that our messaging is jumping on the back of that in a way.
Brilliant. Alvin, you well, in the previous podcast, you told us about the importance of test, learning, repeat, right? And also that involved classic marketing, ATL campaigns. Is also influencer marketing on your plans? Is something that you are doing or planning?
Well, planning within our current position, always, we're always looking to experiment with new options that are available to us. In terms of kind of influencers, to echo Emily's point, if you want a cost-effective solution to activating influencer marketing, you have to start in-house. I think that is probably your best place to start in terms of kind of understanding how that might work for you guys, and especially when you've got the people in-house with the expertise. And when we speak about the kind of tone of voice, you might lose that when you may look for additional influencers within the market. You just might lose that kind of connection because they might not necessarily kind of understand fully what the brand is all about. Where if you can, like again what Emily said, if you can train people in-house and utilize them and their own networks, you're in a much better position to go after the people who are already interested in your product and your target market. It takes a lot to kind of understand as well. Well, who are the audiences you want to go after? If you want to go after an audience that you're currently not targeting, then yeah, we may look at other influencers who are doing well in the space, but I would always advocate to start with, internally employee advocacy first, and try and train them and teach them and educate them to almost be their own micro influencers. And even better if they're at a C-suite level, which is what we're doing. We're working with our kind of senior people here to become influencers, supporting them from a PR aspect to marketing to social to blogs. If we're covering all those different facets, we're almost creating our own influencer team in-house, which takes half the time and much cheaper as well.
Brilliant. So let's talk about how we can use our influencers, whether they are internal or external. For example, classic example could be engaging with an external influencer and asking them to run a webinar. So immediately you go after their audience and you convert them probably as leads for your business, or creating top of the funnel content. So you can record a conversation with a client, and then you can use that as a marketing asset to promote it on your social media. Or engaging employees with content. For example, we had the experience of interacting with an external influencer last year, a YouTuber, and we collaborated with our data science team. And usually it's not very easy to collaborate with them because they are super busy. And if you ask them to write a white paper, for example, probably they don't have time to do so. However, working with an external influencer, it was an experience that you noticed that they enjoyed a lot. They collaborated on the script of the video that this YouTuber created. And well, examples like those, if you could tell me, maybe Romy, that you have experience with consultants, tell me how it is promoting the same report that a company promotes than working with the consultants and something like that.
Yeah, sure. So I agree with a lot of what's been said in terms of the objectives with influencer marketing in B2B are a lot less tangible. We tend to focus a lot more on creating thought leadership content and also looking at how we can use people within a business to put value out there that adds to the brand's credibility. So one example that I can talk about is a recent white paper that was being launched within professional services, where we decided to use internal leaders as influencers to kind of leverage their LinkedIn profiles, looking at what aspects of the report are relevant for each individual leader's audience. All of them had different topics and areas of expertise as consultants. So we drew on different facts and statistics from that report and then used that to create a kind of personalized LinkedIn article for them. So working closely between the leaders and the marketing team to draft these LinkedIn articles that were then posted in a staggered way. And actually, when we had a look at the metrics, we could see that the leaders using their own personal networks, the content and the engagement with the end content that was the report was actually higher than posting through the company's page and promoting it on the LinkedIn company pages.
Why do we have to use internal people in B2B? Like in B2C, you can get Larry David to promote, what's it called, crypto.com, or the other one that went bust, at the Super Bowl. And it's they're a person, they can kind of promote to their own network. Why do we, couldn't you do that in B2B?
Yeah.
Maybe there aren't B2B celebrities, I don't know.
I don't think we have to use internal influencers when it comes to B2B. I just think that the people with the relevant audience are less obvious when it comes to certain industries. So it would take a bit more digging, a bit more research to find the people with the right audience, and also to be promoting the company's information. But I definitely think it's an area that has a lot of room for potential growth in the future.
I was going to say, it actually comes back to a point that Tamsin was mentioned at the start about kind of psychology as well. I feel like there's a lot more pressure in the B2B market in terms of both sides, in terms of the people who are sending out the message, in terms of the people who need to make the decision in buying whatever product or service it is. There is a lot of pressure from that person who needs to sell, and there's a lot of pressure on that person who's taking on the product and service as well, the kind of the procurement kind of side of things as well, and that journey they have to go through internally. It's not a decision sometimes that you can just make in an instant. So I think there's a lot of emotional, psychological, and pressurized factors, which is why it differs from B2C influencers and B2B influencers. And that's why I think when we say we start in-house, it's because, you know, these people are used to dealing with those pressures and understand the mechanics of how that kind of our product or our brand might operate.
Yeah, another reason, I agree with you completely. Another reason is that with B2B, often they are part of the product that they are selling, or the service is the expertise of the people. So the kind of, by using them as internal influencers, you are showcasing the expertise that exists within the business, which is part of the package that you're trying to sell. If we're talking about professional services like consultants, lawyers, accountants, etc., we do want to promote the actual people themselves, which kind of, you're negating the point if you start using external influencers.
And I just want to add as well, when you are dealing with B2B or specific to my company, our main thought leaders and spokespeople, not only are they influencers from within the company, they're also used in the sales negotiation process. So when you're thinking about bumping up the brand via social media with these internal evangelists and influencers, you want them to be at the forefront, and as you say, as experts, so that when it does come to that final customer negotiation, they're pulled into the negotiation. It just adds so much more credibility to selling the product, because yeah, it's a complex process in B2B.
They're just not total strangers, basically.
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly. Well, Tim, maybe you can bring the other side of the coin, which is because your thought leadership is external. You're not dealing with internal influencers. So please tell us how prospects are influencers, and why approaching them could be a really way to understand the market, to understand your prospects' problems.
Definitely. So I think before getting into that, if I may, I think what's really interesting to me is I've seen LinkedIn evolve over the years into what is now almost a Facebook. I mean, all of you, I'm sure, remember 5 or 6 years ago, I forget exactly how many years ago it was, is that, you know, LinkedIn didn't have this scrolling and this streaming and this constant, and the kind of the number of people that, and the amount of time that they're spending on LinkedIn has just rocketed. So I think what's quite interesting is this whole, even this sort of concept of B2B influencing really has only come about recently, because in my view, yes, there's Twitter for sure, but that's really more consumer orientated, but it's only recently come about. So for me, this conversation is fascinating because it's new and it's exciting, and it's like, how's it evolving? To sort of get into answering your question, Joaquin. So traditionally, I've come from a kind of well, initially it was recruitment. Prior to that, it was sort of sales lead generation using LinkedIn, and very quickly it became obvious as LinkedIn developed that LinkedIn is not a platform for selling. It's a platform for learning. It's a platform for sharing. It's a platform for connecting. And about 5 years ago, we thought, well, a great way to build relationships with buyers is, instead of reaching out to them saying, hey, look, we've got a great product or great service, why don't we have a chat? You know, and there's still a lot of that going on, like spammy stuff, and a lot of it's now moved to email. But to actually go out to people and say, look, you're a particular professional within this sector, you're solving similar problems to a number of other professionals in your sector, your peers, your industry peers. Let's come together and work together on some content. That could be a sort of an ebook. It could be what we call market view publications or other content. And by doing that, they're in a position to share their thoughts and ideas on this particular topic and learn from their industry colleagues as well. So we found that actually the kind of conversions in terms of people showing interest in having a conversation about a product or a service was way lower than when you have a conversation about what's going on in the industry. And so we've been doing this for a few years, and we going back to the kind of the influencer factor. The outcome of this for our sponsors and our clients are not only they get to build relationships with people in their industry, of which a percentage of them could be interested in following commercial conversations, but also you've got this sort of the content asset, the so the LinkedIn posts that can come off the back of that, and of course the fact that potentially up to 100 people might have participated in one of these industry thought leadership programs. They've enjoyed the experience, they get to elevate their own personal brands, and as a result of that, they're more than happy to share the content on LinkedIn. Of course, you get the multiplier effect. So I think it's one of many sort of strategies that involve content, credibility, influencers, and senior professionals within their sector in order to get your message out. So that's kind of how we operate.
Tom, we were having a conversation just a couple of minutes ago with Guild, the Guild's founder. Guild is a platform to build communities. Do you think maybe the next step after influencer marketing is community marketing? As Tim was mentioning, you put people in front of their peers. Basically, what you're doing is creating a community. Do you think it's the future like that?
Yeah, if I could just get another word, if that's okay. Yeah, I totally agree. And in fact, we call our sort of strapline now as community-based marketing off the back of what Ashley is doing with Guild, and I really love what they're doing. And I think just going back to this kind of evolution of LinkedIn and how it's really more of kind of Facebook for business now is it's great for broadcasting, but for targeted engagement, it's kind of not so good. Whereas I think these new kind of professional communities that are evolving on the Guild platform, particularly, and there are others, are the opposite. It's not about broadcasting. It's about helping people. It's about engaging in interesting professional discussions that are with people who are in a very kind of similar sort of professional category, so to speak. And I think that the more you can encourage clients, buyers, partners, associates, influencers into a community and lead conversations on your category in a much smaller, intimate online community, I think that's, again, it's a different sort of marketing approach, but it's one that I think is going to become more and more popular.
It's a really interesting idea. I don't know whether it happens because in B2C you would find someone that already has a community, which is basically a subset of Instagram's job, their followers, right? Or in Avon Cosmetics, you'd find people that had friends and could find more friends, friends of friends, of create a kind of pyramid like that. But I'm not sure that the equivalent of creating these bespoke communities just to discuss a certain topic would really work so well in B2C. Well, I guess chat rooms, I like that. But yeah, certainly, the concept of creating a community around your theme, full of your prospects who are talking about tangential stuff and getting value and basically being nurtured, to replace the kind of newsletter that goes out once a month full of links sort of thing. It's a lovely idea, although, as we were also discussing with Ashley Friedlin has started this company that aims to replace WhatsApp for business. That's the idea. But yeah, as we were discussing, it is very hard, obviously, to create that. It might be zero cost, but it's a lot of time and effort, and you need to get upwards of 200, 300 people, he reckons, before it starts to become self-sustaining. Because only, like he said, 10% of the people produce 90% of the comments. So you've got to have 300 people before you have 30 people who are regularly engaging. Obviously, it takes a lot of time, but
yeah, I want to come back to one point that Tim mentioned, that maybe as I think it's like this, that less is more sometimes, and in communities maybe you need to put more thought on what you're saying, or you can be more transparent maybe, and you really write in the community what you really think is more authentic. And we had a discussion last week with someone from Corn Ferry. He told us, I believe I don't remember the exact phrase, but it was, I believe, social media and LinkedIn is totally broken because it's so easy to share things. And if you listen to all the experts, they say you need to post every single day or every 2 days. But at the end, you are not putting much more thought on the concept. And maybe in a community it's different. Maybe in a community you are more authentic. You are solving someone else's questions. I don't know. Well,
can I add on to that as well? I think as well, and this transcends across that community space and also just social media platforms in general. It always comes back to needing that exchange of value, that people need to take away something. So even though the authenticity is there, but like you say, so many people just follow kind of best practice with the algorithm, but they don't actually think about the content or how they're communicating that content to their target demographic. And it needs, even if it's a community space, it needs that exchange of value, or people just won't be in that space. They'll be like, I'm not gaining anything from being here, so I'm going to go where this other place that's already taking my attention. And we're all aware that all these platforms are fighting for everyone's attention at all times.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'd be really interested to know how many LinkedIn comments, the comments people write under posts are written by ChatGPT, because they all look so generic.
Yeah. Well, it's mostly people complimenting people.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, let's come back into influencer marketing and maybe let's see which examples you've seen that work really well, or those that are really bad. Maybe like Tom mentioned, like a ChatGPT style of comment is definitely something that you don't want to see. For example, a good example I saw was a company Beyond Encryption. They head of marketing interviews their sales team every week, and then posting those videos and as ads on LinkedIn. And the result of that was like he was every single week very connected with his audience. So he was using his sales team as influencers, and because the sales team are way more connected with the audience than maybe the C-suite, and well, I thought it was a good example. Maybe you have more examples or case studies around this that you could share.
I don't mind sharing about the person I mentioned just before, who is actually our Associate Director of Business Development as well. So he's really established himself well on that platform. And as I said, he started out just doing the business page, but he did quite quickly become almost the face of the brand, because he was posting so much imagery with him in it. And it was very much kind of people were buying into him more than the brand as well. So then he obviously moved to kind of focus more on his personal profile. But that's been so successful for him. But a lot of it has come down to him really talking about his expertise, which comes back to the points, the really valuable points everyone was making before about being at that forefront in that business space of the experts are here educating, showcasing projects that the business are doing as well. And that's what really gets that kind of interest from that the businesses in that B2B area as well. So him doing that and also driving our initiatives behind that with our hashtags and always tagging us. And we have our little mascot as well, who's just sat behind me over here, who we encourage. It's a little bear. And it sounds silly, but actually, for some reason, the photos of the bear do phenomenal on social media. I don't know why. People just love teddy bears. It must be a psychological comfort thing, perhaps.
So you're kind of creating a teddy bear influencer.
Well, we were trying at one, but some of the senior leads were like, this might not be quite what we're trying to put out, but it does do really well. But yeah, like really jumping, like I said before, jumping on the back of what he's doing, but him talking about the projects. And he has this thing where he does like office for the day, or office on-site office or things like that, where he posts on site what we're doing on the ground as well. So showing that groundwork, and for someone to be an associate director of business development who's still going out and doing the groundwork, like it really helps people connect to our business and our people within the business as well. But yeah, he's doing so well, and scheduling on LinkedIn's definitely helped that as well, I'm sure. But engaging as well, like you were saying before, not just putting out, but also actively engaging with that community. So he's, and this came from the training a little bit, but he is very hot on with, he replies to comments with quite fruitful comment replies, keeping that conversation going, telling the algorithm that this is good content, lots of people are commenting. So engaging with that community is almost, I would say, 50% of the work in terms of when you're putting that stuff out there as an influencer.
Yeah, I think although it's still, although it's B2B, people still do buy into people and individuals and their online personalities that come with that as well. I was just going to say, I've seen the newsletter feature on LinkedIn work quite well for leaders that have engaged audiences already, just to put out updates about what they're up to, industry updates, behind the scenes type of content, and then communicate with their LinkedIn audience through this newsletter subscription feature. So, but I don't think it works for everyone. I think it works for people that already have quite a built up engaged audience.
I think the behind the scenes concept is something that could work quite well. Saw a video it's actually from ages ago, but Lockheed Martin did this thing where they created like a field trip to Mars for a group of school kids, where they like the bus, you've seen this, like their bus is full of, they turn into screens, like the windows of the bus turns into screens, so all the kids get on the school bus and then they're driving and they go through a tunnel and they come out of the tunnel and suddenly they're on Mars because all the screens turn, and but most of it was not, it's like showing these kids really enjoying it, going, yeah, we're on Mars. But then it was like interviewing the people behind it who'd done all the technology for it, and like, that was quite good. Also, you've seen like the Zero campaign with Reese, what's his name? Guy from Flight of the Conchords, Reese Darby, where he's running a marathon, and he goes, running a marathon, running a business is like running a marathon in a desert. Seen that one? No. But that's quite good.
I think people underestimate video content as well. It doesn't always have to be some corporate polished professional level, with all the high tech cameras and everything. You can just have, a CEO or someone in the business whipping out their phone and doing a 30-second video update while they're walking to the train station or something. So I've seen that kind of rough and ready, self-filmed, because people find it more authentic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was about to say we had a major product launch announcement and go-to-market plan, and actually one of the most effective tactics was using our CTO doing a very rough and ready video series, just so that we could get ahead of a certain or specific conversation which we wanted to break out into the market with. And that was our highest levels of engagement. And then you can continue to like drip feed and nurture that specific content for a long time. Like video content is probably one of the best forms when you have an influencer with already a decent amount of following, but then it will just bump up their following even more because people see this person, as you say, people trust people more than they trust a product at the end of the day. So if the CTO or CSO is advocating for something or a conversation, people are going to believe it more or want to believe it.
I think what's interesting, Tams, and I fully agree with you, I find it fascinating that everyone knows that video content is so high performing and it's so easy and it's so cheap, and everyone appreciates that the rough and ready is the most authentic, but none of us are really doing it, or not enough anyway. It's like, why is it?
Instead, people are sort of sitting down doing these sort of step-by-step video frames, planning out, spending loads of money on these corporate videos, and they just flop most of the time. Even sort of filming webinars and pushing them out with salespeople, influencers, they also do just as amazing. And that's a webinar and video content. So that's two pieces of content rolled into one. I mean, it's just all about repurposing and recycling as well.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned before, this experience working with data scientists, perhaps if you ask them, okay, record a video, like a selfie video, they would say no.
Yeah, our CTO would be like, our head of data science, for example, would be terrified of that. Like, just would not return my calls, not return my messages.
Exactly.
But pretend that I'm not asking him to do it.
But if you ask him,
dependent on people's personality sometimes and their level of comfortability with putting themselves out there, which is not consistent with whatever level their role happens to be.
But
It's
if you
true. I
ask
mean,
them to be in a meeting with this YouTuber that is super interested to understand what the data science team is doing with transformers and whatever, they are super happy to do so. And then you record the conversation and you put it out there. And
that's getting two influencers together, basically. You get an internal influencer with an external influencer. Suddenly they're both actually giving you more than you'd ever get if you were to go to them directly, maybe. Yeah.
Maybe that's the secret recipe, having a bit of collaboration with people who are super comfortable with content creation, and getting them to collaborate with the leaders internally.
Yeah, that's something that we've tried here, because obviously the payment space is quite niche when you think about it in terms of digital banking and elements like that, and very new for influencers. So the majority of influencers we see in our space are kind of come from a PR background or are journalists, and they're the ones who have the most clout, the most followers, the most engagement, because they are firsthand in terms of breaking news topics, driving the discussions that kind of brands and marketers and salespeople and C-suites need to know. And also we're seeing kind of media brands and your event organizers become more of influencers. So they're the ones who are driving conversation. Then you're seeing companies like ourselves or people from our companies or similar to us kind of partnering up with those brands to say, well, you know, the whole point of using influencers or is to influence a new audience which you haven't currently got eyeballs on or tapped into at the moment. And, you know, people who run events and people who are journalists who are quite prolific on kind of social media, in this example, it's a good excuse to kind of tap into that and build a partnership to kind of leverage that. And that's something we've seen quite a lot in the fintech space, is, you know, brands working with kind of media brands who have got a good established following, and whether that's a fireside chat, which is then transcribed into a blog, into video content, etc. You know, it can almost stem from an event itself. So it's almost like we're going to utilize this presenter at this event and host a fireside chat with them, or try and become a guest on there, and then use that as content. And the kind of, then you, like you were saying, you're using the best of both worlds. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tim, you also had experience working with journalists and also with like micro influencers. I don't know, like crypto you mentioned. How was that experience, and also how is the experience working with journalists?
I mean, so yeah, I also work very closely with the PR function side of things, and journalists nowadays are probably their external influencers that B2B marketers will probably get closest to. It is quite hard. We've already spoken about it. When you're dealing with a B2B brand, it's harder to find external influencers that will advocate to the brand, to the direct customers, and help you actually sell. Because at the end of the day, you need to always keep the customer at the back of your mind, because you do need to sell a product. One time we did actually use an internal influencer on a YouTube video with an external influencer, and it is just a lot harder to control. Similar with journalists, when internal influencers have interviews with journalists, it's a lot harder to control the brand and the message going out after, compared to if you are just using internal advocacy. You will reach different and bigger audiences, which is great for brand awareness, but whether it's the right brand, that's another question. So you just need to be super careful about who you are selecting and whether it's going to be the right message at the end of the day, especially if there's sensitivity surrounding certain customers and that kind of stuff. So it's harder, but I mean, there's more risk and there's more benefit. So you've just got to weigh up pros and cons at the end of the day, depending on who you're dealing with.
With external influencers like that, in those respects, it's worth thinking about kind of those like influencer relations. So if you're going to invest in this person externally, should that be a long-term strategy? So that, like, and that's such a good point that you made then, Tamsin, about if as soon as you've kind of wrapped up what you're doing, are they going to just move along and work along with another brand that perhaps doesn't align with you? And then if people have bought into that influencer, they're going to be like, oh, hang on a minute, do these people really care that much if they've had that person who doesn't have that same brand message or is aligned with their kind of values? So it's kind of thinking about, if we're going to do that externally, should that be something that's a long-term goal as well outside of that?
I think on that point as well, it's a good point that Emily makes, is make sure that if you are going to work with an influencer, you have an appropriate contract in place with the T's and C's and all the, you know, T's dotted and I's crossed, so we know who owns the content, what happens if there is a breakdown, what's the kind of the clauses within the contract if you're not happy, for example, with what's supplied, because that is something that you just think, oh, you just message them and they'll do something for us. It's so much more advanced than when it first came about in the kind of ecosystem, if you like. So I think I've seen that quite often where, you know, we've had working for P&O Cruises, when you would deal a lot with influencers on Instagram, if you didn't have an appropriate contract in place, you know, a lot of these influencers at that time didn't really know that they had a contract. They just were kind of looking for, you know, a paid ad or paid media opportunity, basically. So I think making sure everything's written down, and you've even got, if you've got a legal team, get the legal team to check it where you can, because it's more important now than ever.
Has anyone used, someone was telling us this morning about Analytica, which is apparently some sort of influencer platform, which I would assume takes care of some of that. But there are probably, I mean, I know there are others in certainly the B2C space of like, you know, they'll aggregate loads of influencers and they'll give you like a one-stop shop to. Has anyone looked at that?
There's Analytica, BuzzSumo, and Tracker with 2 A's, TRAACKR.
I've used, I think, Tribe before. Again, this was at P&O Cruises, so B2C kind of based influencer, and that was where they would have kind of influencers on their database, and you could almost put a brief in, and then they would kind of manage that for you and send the brief, almost like an agency, really, to be honest with you. But again, there's probably ones where they're more B2B focused, but it's not something we've looked at as of yet, because I think it's more important for you now, if you, especially in the B2B space, to kind of do that identifying process yourself, and kind of, as opposed to leaving it to an agency. It's just another step, isn't it, really? Whereas you could kind of, if you're on social and you know what you're looking for, you could probably do the research yourself, or see the people who are appearing and making the impact yourself.
Yeah, coming back to the content creation process, Romy, you have worked with internal and external influencers. What are the difference or nuances that you see working with one group and the other? For example, in how involved they are with the content creation process.
Yeah, so I've mainly worked on campaigns with internal influencers. What I would say the difference is than working with external is that internal influencers do have an entire day job and they're very busy. So in terms of the involvement from marketing and communications, they probably need a lot more done for them in terms of content creation and planning. And they're more able to sign off on ideas, topics, and drafts of content, etc. Whereas external influencers, they're content creators as part of their career. So they're professionals they understand their audience. They very much want to be involved in the ideation process, looking at putting the brief together, having their input early on from the stage of drafting the brief and coming up with an agreement, in terms of establishing those clear expectations and guidelines. As Alvin mentioned, the contracts side of things is a lot more important with external influencers, so that you know what you're getting out from them, whereas with the internal influencers you can have a lot more input and kind of steer that towards your marketing objectives yourself as the marketer, is what I would say.
And what about reaching out to external influencers? For example, in our case, we're a startup, we want to engage with a top tier influencer and invite him to the podcast. Do you have any kind of recommendations of how to approach like a super influencer? Because at the end, they need organic content. Have you tried something like that? Tom, maybe do you have any idea on this?
Well, you've just done it, I think, Joaquin, haven't you? You've just done, so Joaquin, you were reading a book about basically the sorts of content that prospects want to read. And then you reached out to this guy that had literally written the book that you were reading and said, come on a podcast with us. I think the key thing is, can you offer them something that they want? So, I mean, very often the influencers actually want an audience, and you don't necessarily have to pay them sometimes. Like if they want to access the same audience that you're offering, and you offer them a structure to do that, you know, not everyone has the time to make a video or has the resources to edit it, publish it, or a podcast or a white paper. So if you say, look, what I can't, I'm not an influencer, so I can't offer that. You can offer that part of it, but I can offer you the infrastructure for actually producing the content and distributing it and promoting it. That's something that they often don't have. So you can sometimes get it for free, because if your interests align, you know.
Yeah, if you want to pay him, probably it's impossible. Yeah, but I think in that case, another thing in the equation was that I told him that another like a third party was using his strategy. So I think it was a good opportunity.
So it'll form a case study for him. I mean, that's even better, isn't it?
Exactly. So the only thing
he'll be on a call with someone who's saying, I've used your method and it's been really effective. I mean, yeah. That's
we only will do the link between the author and the people that is using the strategy.
And also you can sort of somewhat control what he's going to say, because you know what he's going to say, because he's going to talk about his own product, which is not, you know, maybe not exactly what you want, but it's just good sometimes to be in the same room as someone influential, even if you don't talk about your product.
I also don't think it's a bad thing to be kind of transparent in the fact that, you know, you could almost say, you know, if I was to approach it and say, look, we're trying to build our audience, and you know, if that's something that you're keen on doing as well, then together, you know, we can look to, you know, do a podcast or a video interview, which would help kind of leverage both our audience profiles and also raise our profiles as well. I think there doesn't need to be kind of smoke and mirrors around it. Sometimes I think we can just be direct and honest and say, look, we need to increase our followership, our readership, whatever it is, and we think you're a great person to help us do that. And likewise,
it's also just astonishing how open people are to contribute, and the problem mostly is that we don't ask people. I mean, I was a journalist briefly, and we used to reach out to people that you'd think would never ever speak, and I spoke to the president of Georgia and interviewed them on the day that Russia was invading their countries back in like 2008 or something. But the last Russian war. But you know, and this was like, you could hear the bombs going off in the background. You'd think there's no way the president of this country is going to take an hour and a half to speak to a journalist whilst the country's being invaded. I mean, if you can, but it happened. So you can do that, then you can, you know, then you can definitely just ask people, and they're remarkably willing to speak.
Taking action, a bit like getting these authentic videos done. Just got to get on with it. Ask the questions, make the videos. Action.
Explain that this is why I want to speak with you, and sometimes not offering money might help as well. If you approach someone, you offer them money and say, this is what I want you to speak about, they might be more suspicious or ask more questions or be more difficult than if you say, I just want to really benefit, our audience would really benefit from your opinion, a bit of flattery, but not too much, you know, just ask them.
Yeah. Well, let's move into the last part, which is how do we measure success of our efforts, right? Whether it is interacting with a journalist or with an influencer, we are investing our time or resources. So what do you think is the best strategy to do so? Many people believe in an always on strategy. So taking your budget, dividing it every month thinly, and then looking for a return in a long-term strategy? Or do you think this is a short-term strategy? Please tell me, what do you think, Emily, Romy, Alvin?
I actually think an always-on strategy, like we were saying before, that more of a heavy focus on like influencer relations. I think social media marketing in particular, coming from my background, it is rarely kind of short-term gain. Obviously, we do hear about people who do, you know, it booms overnight, and it does happen. But if you are doing this organically without kind of any paid behind it, then it is going to be quite hard to have that immediate kind of ROI that you want. And it's going to be quite difficult to even measure that in your analytical data as well without a kind of long-term overview of, bare minimum 90 days really. I think short-term is possible if it's kind of the campaign and you have the right influencer for the job, whether that's internal, external. But again, that's coming back to that person who is aligned, and like Alvin was saying, having that contract in place so that if they do move forward, then you're making sure that they're not kind of discrediting your brand and your values after that as well. So I do think kind of a long-term strategy, I feel is much better in terms of when you are working with influencers, and then there is that consistent exchange of value. And like you were saying before, I think Thomas, you said it about offering them that ongoing support as well, kind of, even if that's not payment, especially if you are in a business where that support is there and it is being, it's already, maybe you have the infrastructure of training sessions, of resources that you can give to them, because that is just kind of that long-term gain. And then over time, they kind of have the buy-in into your business as well, because they'll feel so valued and they will have gained so much. So I do think that long-term strategy for influencers is definitely the prominent option, but short-term may have a place if it is a specific campaign. You see a lot of bigger businesses who will use macro influencers for something very short and specific with a campaign. But I think the value for them is definitely much less. Yeah, you may have that wider audience reach, but I think it's just not going to give quite as much as that long-term relationship would give.
Yeah, I think you have to treat it like, if I was advising, I'd say, treat it as a campaign. So, outlay what your objectives are, no matter what. So what is it you want to achieve as a business? And so whether you're working with an influencer, internal or external, they're fully aware and they're signing up to what it is that you want to try and achieve. And then I don't think it's out of the question to then quantify that. So look at the current metrics that you're currently getting, or what your attribution is currently happening with. If we take social media specifically, what is your current average rate of engagement? What are your current impressions reaching? What is your followership? How is your followership growing at the moment? So you've got a benchmark to start with. And obviously, if you're using an influencer to then grow those channels and to grow those metrics, you can then say, well, because we're using you and we can see what your current audience numbers are at and what the kind of engagement you're getting on your content, we then expect to kind of see this kind of growth, or you can try and put some sort of percentages so everyone can be accountable. So that obviously the byproduct is going to be content, which is great, and we can, as part of the longer term campaign, we know that can be used. But in terms of kind of how do you measure it specifically, I like I said, put the metrics in place, and so we can quantify it, and then we can track it accordingly to really make sure everyone's getting the most out of the time spent.
Yeah, I second that. I think establishing what good looks like in terms of your organic marketing content and performance, and then comparing that with using that as the benchmark for the influencers' content, as you say. And also remembering to make sure influencers use tracking links. If your one of your objectives is something, a metric like driving traffic to a website or a white paper or a webinar, so that you can look at and get actual numbers and see, okay, this piece of content is what drove, or this person drove this amount of views or downloads or subscriptions, etc. So that you can attribute it to their specific campaigns.
Yeah, going off that, it was quite a fun thing. We had a webinar campaign going on, and we actually used it as a competition with our sales folk. They all had individual UTM tracking links, and then they were therefore more sort of inclined to start boosting their own profiles on LinkedIn using these links and then promoting the webinar. And that was all internal influencers. Yeah, it was good fun. Because some people are reluctant to post on their LinkedIn, but as soon as you add a little, competitive edge, people, for some reason, especially in sales, more inclined to do it.
What was the prize? What was the prize for the most?
I didn't even need to give them a prize. It was just a but that's just playing on the right psychology, knowing the personality type of the average salesperson, and then getting them more involved.
As soon as you introduce a leaderboard or any type of competition, it really drives a lot more incentive for people.
Definitely.
Super interesting.
That's a very good idea.
And it's not just like, you're not ranking them on how many times you've posted. If with a tracking link, you're ranking them on how much web traffic they're driving.
Yeah.
So that's really incentivizing them, as you say, longer term, to build their networks.
Yeah.
Because then they'll find it much easier.
they'll have to be
I love that
creative
idea.
about how to get more sign-ups. So
Well, thank you so much for all of your ideas. This has been a very nice conversation. I hope you have enjoyed